Hey, everybody. Welcome to the GMI Rocket Show. I'm your host, Roman Zelchenko, former immigration attorney turned entrepreneur, the co-founder of Laborless, an immigration tech company that automates H-1B visa compliance, and also the founder of GMI Rocket, a digital marketing agency for the immigration and mobility industry, and of course, which also brings you this show. Today, episode number 105. I'm super excited to talk about a company that is building some really cool AI products in the immigration space. There's a lot of talk about AI. I mean, there has been for a few years. ChatGPT blew the top off of the pot, or the cover off the pot. I don't know what the right thing is, but now every industry, including immigration, has amazing products coming out that are using generative AI to help with workflows and things like that. So I'm super excited for today's conversation. We have our guests coming actually from multiple parts of the world. So this is a really cool conversation. So we have two co-founders of a company called CaseBlink. So co-founder Khalil Zlaoui and Tina Zedginidze, who, and I'm Zelchenko. All three of us have last names that start with the letter Z. So this is a really special episode, if not only for that reason. I'm super excited to talk to them about what their product does, how they factor in artificial intelligence to help with immigration processes, and of course their backstories and everything. Before we jump in, I do want to say thank you to the main sponsor of this episode, Lex Reception. So for the immigration lawyers or folks working at immigration law firms who are watching or listening, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service. They provide they answer phone calls. They provide reception services for emails and other appointments and messages that come into the firm. That way, you don't ever have to miss an inquiry from an existing client or a potential client. They're working 24/7. So if it's a weekend or an evening and you're home and out of work or home from work, you don't miss the opportunity to help your client or schedule something with a prospect. They can even proactively reach out to folks that reach out to your firm and fill out a form, if they have questions. So they're basically like a little bit of a sales team, an outbound sales team for you. They integrate with tech products like Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and other software solutions that your firm may use. And for folks who listen to the GMI Rocket Show, Lex Reception offers $250 off your first month of service with them. Just use the link in the show notes, or reach out to them and say that you heard about them from here. Okay, without further ado, super excited for this conversation. Khalil, Tina, thank you guys so much for being here, and I'm excited to dive into your story and have more AI discussions in the immigration space.
Thank you, Rowan, for having us. We're super excited to be on the show.
Yeah, really excited, Rowan.
So I know there's two of you, and you actually have a third co-founder, right?
Yes, John.
John, yeah, just I think if we had all three of you on, we'd need 3.5 hours for the show. So I appreciate you both for being here. So we're going to start off a little bit by hearing from you guys separately, kind of hearing your backstories, your journeys to eventually how you crossed paths and met, and then of course we'll jump into CaseBlink. For folks who are watching live, if you have questions or comments, please leave them in the chat. Leave them in the comments wherever you're watching, and I'd love to bring that into the discussion here. So, Khalil, I'll start with you. And you're, by the way, sitting in Tunisia right now, which is amazing. Thank you for joining. I know it's evening, I guess, for you. So tell me a little bit about how you grew up in Tunisia. You were born.
I did.
There. What was that? Yeah, so tell me a little bit about that. As someone who ended up becoming an engineer, moving to the States, working in the U.S. and eventually starting a business. How did that all start back home?
Yeah, so I went to a very international high school. So even when I was growing up here, I was exposed to different cultures. I went to a French school, so we had people from all over the world, mostly Europe and Africa, though. And yeah, it was really a great experience. I really enjoyed it. I met all of my childhood friends here, and that also, before going to the US, I actually spend a few years in Europe. So that helped me move to Europe after high school.
So I know you studied engineering when you eventually went to university. When you were kind of a little kid, I like to ask this question of founders. Were you kind of a tinkerer? Did you take things apart and rebuild them? Like, were you an entrepreneurial? Were you kind of maybe bought and sold stuff? Do you remember any of that?
Yeah. My background is a little more complex than just engineering, so we can go into that.
Yes, definitely.
I actually went to business school as well, and then so I can walk you through that. But yeah, as a kid, I always wanted to. I remember one summer I had this plan to like build a wooden car, like an actual functioning car. Of course, it didn't happen, but I always had ideas like that. So I always wanted to create things. And I've always wanted to start a business. Also, I think what happened is I was just waiting for the right moment. And somehow I think of that as a mistake because in my opinion, there is no right moment. You want to jump into it and try it. But yeah, I've always wanted to start something. In terms of my background, I tried a bunch of different things. So after high school, I moved to Paris, and I wanted to study applied math and economics, and that got me into business school. So I spent 3 years in the French business school, and ended up working on a trading floor and doing some financial engineering. So, very different from what I ended up doing later in life. It was fun. I liked the financial engineering bit more than the trading. And so I thought, okay, I really like math and engineering, so I'll just go back to school and study engineering. And at the time, this was more than 10 years ago, data science was kind of, the new thing or a new, label or industry. And so I decided to go back to school and study applied math and data science. And the idea behind it is that although I liked finance, I enjoyed the technical part of it more than, the trading part. And so I thought I could apply this to maybe something else. And I ended up studying biostatistics or healthcare data science, which is data science applied to healthcare data. And my school had connections with other schools in the US. And so that's how I ended up moving to the US and actually getting another degree in the US. So I ended up getting 2 bachelor's degrees and 3 master's degrees. I don't know if I'm super proud of that, but that kind of gives you a bigger picture of my background, which is not just engineering.
So what are the 3 master's degrees?
Okay, master's. I should remember. So business school, so management, and then biostatistics in the US, and then in France, applied math and statistics.
Gotcha. I see. So these are all graduate programs after undergraduate.
Correct.
Yeah.
I should have gone for a PhD, but I was almost do that after the 3 masters.
So, I mean, listen, but I think it goes to show that you're sort of exploring various fields and trying to, and one of the best ways to explore that, if you have the opportunity, is to, of course, go to school and study and be in a rigorous or academic environment, to experiment on projects without having to, have a full-time job in whatever that field is. That's really cool. Do you feel like, I'm just curious, because as both somebody who always wanted to start a business and then also somebody who had ideas, but then also you clearly liked school, right? Because you wouldn't continue to go if you didn't like it. Were you ever pushed as by your family or whatnot to go into business, to say this is the way you should do it? Or was it always, look, academics are first, you should study, and then that will lead you to maybe success or a career?
Nothing like that happened. It was mostly my decisions and figuring out what I wanted to do. So I think some people succeed at that, and they very much know what they want to do at 18 years old. I was
Right.
a confused kid. I wasn't sure. I also thought about going to medical school at that point. I was good at all disciplines, and I kind of liked everything. So I liked philosophy, I liked geopolitics. I also was good at math and physics. So there are a lot of things that I was interested in, and that to some extent it was hard for me to pick something that would exclude something else. And so the first thing I did after high school is I went to what we call French preparatory. It's not really preparatory school, but it's called French classe préparatoire, and it gives you the curriculum is pretty broad. So I ended up studying philosophy, economics, math, and I ended up continuing to study
Yeah.
the things that I liked.
Yeah, in a way, that's a little bit of a microcosm of entrepreneurship, right? Where you have to actually do a lot of different things. I think I was somewhat similar. I went into college studying financial economics, and I've started to do a master's in financial economics, and I dropped out of that and then did a second bachelor's in philosophy. And then I didn't know, and I was working in investment banking actually in college. And then I said, I don't want to do this. And I went to law school, and now I run a tech company. How does that all make sense? I have no idea. But I think but to me, it always felt, I'll tell you my philosophy on it. And then Tina, thank you. You're so patient listening to this. So I want to move on to you. But one thing that struck me, Khalil, kind of, or maybe that I just feel that I can relate to, is that I also felt that I was interested in everything. And so, but then I always thought, if I run a business, I can do everything. Like if I am at the top, CEO, founder, whatever you want to call it, of a business, I can be creative and make marketing decisions and think about colors and logos and stuff. And then I can go over here and use my logical engineering brain to help with product. And then I could use my emotional intelligence to work with people, and think about that. And then I can talk to lawyers and think, use sort of language. I always felt that at least the left and right brain, at the very least, if there's something that's sort of mathematical, then something that's more creative together, are really good traits for business. And so eventually when I started my first business, I was like, why didn't I do this 10 years ago? Like you said, waiting for the right time. But I guess there is no right time, and the time we do it is the right time.
Exactly.
So Tina, thank you so much for waiting. You have a very different story, or I shouldn't say very different, but from, coming at it from a different place, because you are an attorney. So talk a little bit about, if you can share your background. I know you were born in Georgia and you grew up there. Talk a little bit about that, and sort of, what were you interested in when you were little? Did you think you would end up here?
Yeah, I guess unlike you two, I never really planned on doing something entrepreneurial or getting into business. But so I was born in Georgia, and my family moved to the U.S. when I was 8 years old. And we moved to Fort Collins, Colorado, which is my dad was doing his MBA at Colorado State University. So it's not a big city. It's about like an hour away from Denver. And at the time, I didn't speak any English. And I remember my experience coming to the US and going through the entire immigration process. It was mostly my parents that had to, of course, deal with the stress of it. I was still young at the time, and I didn't really have to, pay a lot of attention to it, but it definitely impacted what, my career choice down the road, I think. So when we were in Colorado, the plan was originally to come here just for 2 years. My dad would finish his program, and then we would go back home to Georgia. And eventually, 2 years turned into 5 years, and we ended up staying here. And even though my, parents, we were lucky, I think, after my dad finished his program, we ended up staying. My dad got a job. So, went through all of the visas. He was on an F1, then H1B, and got the green card and eventually citizenship. And so I remember moments, though, when there was uncertainty about, okay, would we be able to stay or not? So there was, there were some times when my dad would lose his job, and we thought that, okay, maybe we would have to go back.
Mm.
And even though, when we first came here, the plan was to not stay permanently, and we were just going to come here for a little bit of time, this became my home. And so I remember even back then, during those moments, I would be like, the US is my home now. I don't want to go back. And yeah, you pick up the language and the culture really fast as a kid, and your home changes. So yeah, that's kind of.
Did you make, like, when you were leaving Georgia, I mean, 8 years old, you're not old, but you're also not a newborn. Did you make already, friends already? You obviously started to go to school there. Do you remember that moment of like, okay, we're leaving and we're moving to this foreign country? Was that exciting for you, if you remember? Was it scary? Were you sad to kind of leave your childhood friends?
Yeah, I think it was a mixture of emotions. I was mostly excited, and I don't think I understood how long 2 years would be even. Like at the time, I was like, oh yeah, we're going on a trip. It'll be fun, and then we'll come back. But I remember it was still an emotional time because, it was hard saying goodbye to family, and we didn't know how long we would be gone. And I thought that we would see our family much quicker than we did because, 2 years and travel is difficult on a visa. So we ended up, I don't remember how long it was until we came back to visit Georgia. I think for my dad especially, he was always worried about having to, go through the visa stamping process, and that's always risky. So I think he didn't come back home for maybe over 5 years, maybe 2 years, a long time. I think we came sooner.
It's and it's something that people don't think about often from an immigration standpoint. Obviously, it's exciting to come to America for opportunities, but saying goodbye to family and not being sure when you'll see them, and yes, this is the modern era. It's not like you're going on a ship across the Atlantic Ocean. You can fly in a relatively short period of time, but there are risks when you go back to the consulate to get your stamp. Will you get it? Like, what's going to happen at the interview? If there's a chance that you may not get back, are you willing to risk that to see your family? And if not, you might as well be this 1500s taking a boat, because you're still not going to see your family for 5 years. So I think I don't know. I think it's important sometimes to talk about these sort of soft aspects, kind of the emotional aspects of it, because it's something we tend to forget. So and then as you were growing up here, as you're getting older, obviously you went to law school eventually. Was the plan always for you to be an attorney? I mean, were you inspired to be an immigration attorney long before you went to law school, or did this sort of flourish as you entered school and thought, hey, I have a relationship to this topic, let me explore it?
Yeah, I didn't really know what I wanted to do either. I went to college, I got a degree in psychology. I was interested in a lot of different things. My parents did actually, my mom's a doctor. She was a doctor back in Georgia. And so she, of course, was like, go to med school. But I knew that science, didn't really interest me. I didn't know what I wanted to do. I debated doing a few different fields, like architecture, journalism, ended up majoring in psychology and then going to law school. So I decided to go to law school, and that's really when I became interested in immigration law. I think definitely the influence of going through that process and wanting to know more about it and help other people. But I wasn't set on it. And then during law school, I took an immigration law class and then joined the Immigration Human Rights Clinic at the University of Minnesota. And I really enjoyed it. And I think from that moment on, I knew that this is what I wanted to do. I didn't particularly love law school. I don't know a lot of people that do, but I enjoyed it. And I think I really found my area in immigration. And at the clinic, that's when I had my first client that I represented for an asylum case. And from that moment on, I wanted to do immigration. I thought I would practice in maybe humanitarian or asylum, but ended up doing business and loving that too once I got out of law school. And the experience of like representing companies and especially startups too, seeing them start out small where you would represent like the owner, the CEO, and then if the company's successful, being able to watch it grow and help them with that part of the process, I really liked.
Yeah, I remember. I mean, it was the same for me where I did a clinic and represented a client in law school, and and even now, we started, myself and a few of my classmates started our immigration like student group, which still exists in our law school, and I'm so proud of it that it still exists. And now I talk to students pretty regularly, and a lot of them want to get into humanitarian, family-based immigration, and I have to sort of somewhat break their hearts a little bit and say, listen, you and everybody else, but there just aren't that many opportunities. And they all, a lot of them say, yeah, but I don't want to do employment. But that's, to your point, I don't think they realize that immigration is such a life-changing process. Yes, if you're helping somebody escape, persecution, I mean, what better thing can you do for another human being than that to, save their life, right? But individuals who are smart and, come from anywhere else in the world, their dream can also be to come to the US, and you're changing their life perhaps just as drastically by helping them come to the US on, J1 or, an to stay here on their H1B or to come here on an H1B. I think about obviously a lot of Indian nationals in the US. I mean, that's one of the largest populations of folks coming in on work visas. And, I talk to so many folks, and like their families are not wealthy. They start off, they're from smaller villages or cities. Their families sacrifice immensely to send, one or two kids to university in India. They work insanely hard to do well. And then after all of that collective family struggle and work, they get an opportunity to come to the US. I mean, you're effectively saving them from, poverty, or just maybe even if not poverty, you're helping elevate not just them, but their whole family with an H1B or whatnot, an L1 even. And so I try to share. I love that you said that, because I also had that feeling when I was practicing, employment-based law and immigration. And I try to share that with students now and say, like, listen, you'll feel that same thing working in an employment immigration practice. And hopefully that translates to what like we all do now, right? Which is we took it a step higher and said, let's assist other immigration attorneys to do this amazing work with technology. So I guess if I can use that as a little bit of a transition, Khalil, just to go back to you for a moment, you had 100 degrees from 17 different universities, and so then you came to the US. Can you talk a little bit before we get to CaseBlink? Can you talk a little bit about what did you end up doing? I don't want to go through all of your positions, but at a high level, sort of what did you end up pursuing professionally? Because I think often that does paint the picture of leading up to launching the business.
I ended up being a data scientist. So I ended up being a data scientist specifically in healthcare. So when I was at Brown, I also did research at Harvard, and I was researching the correlation between the onset of psychiatric disorders and mutations in the DNA. And I thought that was really cool, and ended up just staying in healthcare for a little bit. So I worked at CVS Health for about 3 years, mostly doing predictive modeling, machine learning, predicting things like inpatient readmissions, or measuring the impact of the interventions that CVS Health was putting together to improve healthcare outcomes. So I did that for about 3 years. It was super, super interesting, and eventually ended up moving to Google, still in the same space, so still in healthcare. And what I was doing there is building AI software for physicians on top of electronic health records data. So we were leveraging clinical notes data and rendering that in software that helps them digest those clinical notes. So extracting a lot of information about their conditions, validating that they actually had those conditions, whether they were historical, chronic, things like that, whether they're related to them or their family, because all of that data is kind of mixed up together in notes. And also going towards summarizing all of that information. So summarization of the notes in a way that they wouldn't spend hours reading those notes before, a patient appointment. And so the connection, I guess, with CaseBlink is that, I ended up losing my job at Google. So I was part of the 6% that got laid off. And I had to find a solution because I was on an H1. And so I looked into a few, and then I ended up wanting to apply to a national interest waiver. And so that's how, and I guess before that, I always had, I've had experience with immigration my whole life, because even moving from Tunisia to Europe, I've always had issues traveling anywhere pretty much. So even if I wanted to visit some random place, I needed a visa. So I wasn't born in Europe or in the US, where you can you don't really know this struggle until you live it, but you pretty much need a visa to go anywhere. And so then fast forward to when I moved to the US, of course, I had to go through multiple visas. So F1 when I was a student, and then H1 when I worked, and then the national interest waiver.
Now, did you do the national interest waiver once after you had started to work on CaseBlink, or this was sort of like, look, I need to stay here because this is my life, this is my career?
I think it was, now that I think about it, it was a little bit more of a reaction, because the priority dates for the national interest waiver for the EB2 started to move back. And so even if I had gotten approved just then, I would still have to leave. But in my mind, it was an option for me, maybe in the future, or at least that's how we discussed it with my lawyer. And so at the time, it made sense to apply to a national interest waiver regardless.
Now, if I can add, and you don't have to share details about this necessarily, but when you were working, with your attorney, you were on H1, you were exploring, you were going through the motions. Did you ever, did you have any reactions to how that process worked? And again, this is not a judgment on the attorney themselves. Obviously, they did a great job, and you're here. But did you have any thoughts about, maybe this process can be better, or emailing back and forth, or anything like that in your experience?
So when I was going through that as an employee, I did not pay too much attention to it. I have never really thought about, what it takes to put together an H1B, or I would have very minimal interactions with case managers, and they would ask me a couple of questions or my documents, and I would put it into a platform. I wouldn't think too much of it. But when I did the national interest waiver, and it's a more complex case, then I realized how much time it takes and what it takes to put together a case like that. And so from the first time that I reached out to my lawyer to the date at which we filed, it took 3 months, because we had to build my case, because she had to, understand my area of expertise and put together all those documents that take time. A legal brief that's 20, 30 pages long, explaining my area of expertise and why it's important in the US. So yeah, then it hit me, right? So, okay, this is very complex. And it kind of reminds me what we were doing at Google, which is taking all of this information from somewhere and then summarizing it and making it more digestible so that we could use it for something else. And I thought maybe there is an opportunity here for us to automate at least parts of the process, because a lot of it is manual, and with generative AI, a lot of that was becoming more and more possible. Because I think if I had gone through this maybe 6-7 years ago, I wouldn't have thought the same way. But because this was last year, and I was seeing the capabilities of AI, and specifically large language models, I thought we can build something that would make this so much better. From understanding, client documents, summarizing them, extracting information from them, building doing additional research automatically, crafting pieces of the brief, helping with expert letters, all of that. I saw an opportunity for that.
I love that. That's and you know, when those things come together, you start to realize that I can leverage everything that I've done in the past and build an opportunity, or build something and have the opportunity to do that. Meanwhile, Tina, you're working as an attorney. You're working as an employment immigration attorney, and you know, obviously loving your job. This is what, you know, as you've said. What started to, you know, where did you start to think about, or did you start to think about technology sort of at all? Not even with respect to Khalil, but just in general as a practicing attorney.
Not at all, honestly. Like, I used technology, you know, at the law firms I was at, we had case management systems. Some law firms, you know, the first firm I was at didn't use it as much. And then some of the other firms I went to used it a lot more. But it was still very much paper based, and I didn't really question it. I think the biggest change that probably a lot of other attorneys saw was when the pandemic hit, and the law firm I was at, we were already pretty good at using technology, at least from what I thought. But then almost overnight, we had to just completely change the way we worked. And going from forget paper files to how are we now going to do all of this remotely, you know, on our computers. But other than that, I wasn't really thinking much about technology. I wasn't really on my mind other than, you know, what can we do to just work more efficiently? But I never thought much beyond that.
What was it like going through that transition? Because I think that's something a lot of folks can relate to, right? During COVID, in the very beginning of COVID, everything shut down, but life has to go on. I mean, even with borders closing, people thought, I remember immigration lawyers reached out and said, hey, Roman, any thoughts on other career paths I can take? Because I think my firm is going to go out of business. And then, you know, for many law firms, COVID, especially the very beginning, was some of the busiest times they've ever had, you know, figuring out changes, adjusting status in the US, you know, so many different things. What was that experience like for you, just from a technology standpoint, I guess, or maybe a behavioral change standpoint, you know, suddenly having to go from using some technology to sort of everything is totally virtual?
Yeah, I remember that. I think it was like the Monday before I was in San Francisco and everything was going to shut down. And the next day or 2 days later, and we had our managing partner came into the office. She was supposed to be gone that day, and she gathered everybody together, you know, socially distancing, and said, like, this is happening. We're going to all work remotely. One of the partners left to Best Buy to buy a bunch of laptops because people didn't have that. They all worked from the office. And it was also the busiest time because it was cap season. It was March.
Wow. Right.
And so it was a crazy time. And then this started happening. And the thing is, for a lot of attorneys, including myself at the time, I wasn't looking for a new way of working or being more efficient technology wise, but sometimes you're forced into that. And the pandemic was definitely one of those situations where we didn't change the way we worked until we were forced to. But once we were forced to do it with that, it happened pretty quickly. And we realized, you know, it's possible to do this using technology. And then what else can we do to make it better? Yeah.
Yeah. And frankly, even though folks are back in the office now, the level of technology, like the baseline level of technology across the industry has really improved. I want to take a quick pause. I think this is the perfect time as we're talking about, you know, as we're transitioning from in office to remote during the COVID, you know, the pandemic. I just want to say thank you to the second sponsor of this episode, DocketWise, which is, you know, one of the leading case management systems in the immigration space. Most folks have heard of it. If you haven't, you know, DocketWise is now an all-in-one immigration case management platform. They have immigration forms and customizable questionnaires, ton of integrations with other products and services throughout the immigration ecosystem, including my company, Laborless. Great customer service, you know, and I think they, along with some of the other companies, really blew up during the COVID period because they were so user friendly, and firms that were using them actually had a pretty, as far as I know, have heard, pretty good experience going remote when they had to. And I just want to say, one of the things I like about DocketWise, in addition to the tech, is like the content they create for the industry. They support this show, which allows me to have these wonderful conversations. They have a blog, a podcast now as well with their co-founder, James Pittman. They create ebooks and so much stuff. So if you're an immigration attorney or just anybody working in the immigration industry in the US or frankly anywhere in the world, check out DocketWise.com for their case management, but also explore the website. There's a lot of great stuff there. If you're interested in using them, use the link in the show notes, and to schedule like a demo, or reach out to them and tell them you heard about them from the GMI Rocket show. So thank you, DocketWise. So you've had this experience, Tina, during COVID, and you're working remotely. Now technology is becoming more of center stage, I guess, in your career and in the industry. I want to now talk about, how did your guys' paths cross? Because Khalil, here you are helping physicians, and clinics at first, right? Like, use Gen AI to gather a lot of information and provide reports about patients, and then going to Google and doing similar work across, I guess, broader industries. Yes, you're going through the immigration process, but you're sort of doing your own thing here. Tina, you're sort of knee deep, waist deep in the immigration space. You're working, right? You're working at firms, supporting cases, clients, etc. How did your paths cross where, you started to talk about either supporting one another or working together?
I can talk a little bit more about how it first happened, and maybe Tina can share context about what was happening in her life around that time. Roman, I knew I could not do this on my own because I don't have the subject matter expertise in immigration. And the same way that I what we were building at Google, we had physicians involved in building the product because they have the know-how. And for me, building a product in immigration, it was exactly the same thing. I thought we need at least someone to help guide and give advice. And because these were the very early stages of CaseBlink, I wasn't even sure what this was going to be. So I wasn't sure if was going to be a case management system in immigration, or maybe generally for other fields of law. So I thought the good first step here is to have an immigration law advisor. And this was maybe 2 months after I started seriously working on CaseBlink. And so I posted an ad on LinkedIn for an advisor, and then talked to a few people, and then I ended up talking to Tina. And I really enjoyed talking to her, and I thought she would do great. And also because she had so much experience with these writing intensive workflows, which at the time I was thinking, okay, these are the ones that and the national interest waiver is the first one that we were starting with. But Tina had a lot going on in her life too, and she can share that.
Yeah, so from my end, it was about 2 years ago. So I was working at a law firm doing business immigration cases, loving it. That's what I planned on continuing to do. But after the pandemic, I decided to take a year off and go travel. So I quit my job, went to travel. And during that time, before I went traveling, I thought, maybe I'd have some sort of realization. I would want to do something completely different when I come back. You hear all these stories about people that go travel and just have like a discovery that they should be doing something completely different. Well, for me, it wasn't that exciting. I realized that I actually missed the work that I was doing, and I missed representing clients. And so maybe it was a little bit reassuring that, okay, I'm meant to be in this area of work. I'm meant to do immigration. So I came back and I started looking for work. It wasn't the best time to come back to because this was after a lot of the tech companies had layoffs, the economy wasn't doing so great. And so I was living with my sister at the time, and I came across a job posting from LawFlow, which is what our name was at the time, for an immigration attorney. And I just sent in my resume, didn't think much about it. And then Khalil, I reached out to me and we talked. And to be honest, I was like, this is cool and all, but I need a real job. I need to move out of my sister's apartment. I need to find something else. So I was really interested in what he was building, but my mind was still, a little bit behind. But I think what really drew me to it was I could see how passionate Khalil was about this. And I could see how dedicated and serious he was. And he knew exactly what he wanted to do. Maybe not the details, but I could tell that this was, that he was committed to this. And I thought, it was kind of a crazy idea, or I thought it was at the time, but I was like, if anybody could do it, I think it's Khalil. And so I joined as an immigration attorney advisor and ended up finding another, real job, or what I thought of as a real job, a full-time position. And I found myself just drawn more and more to the work with CaseBlink. And they were all on the East Coast, or, in different time zones. So I'd get up early, I'd join meetings with CaseBlink, then I'd go to work, and then I'd come back and, spend the evening working on CaseBlink. And, over time I realized that maybe, I don't know if it was the travel or it was just the time in my life, but I think what I wanted had changed. It was probably more subtle than having like a big realization in the middle of my trip abroad, but I realized that I did want to I do something different. And the energy of working with everybody at CaseBlink, the co-founders, the whole team, it was addicting, and I loved it. And I feel like I was learning so much, and it was challenging me in a way I hadn't really been challenged in a long time. And so, yeah, then I was luckily, Khalil offered me a full-time role, and then I joined them full-time this year.
By the way, where were you traveling? I mean, if I'm assuming you were traveling abroad or were you around the US?
I was traveling abroad, kind of everywhere. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So no realization at the top of Mount Fuji of what you want to do with your life.
No.
That's awesome. I think what I really love about this story is I think sometimes people romanticize these moments, and they think that there is this big, kind of flip, this 180 where someone says, this is what I want to do or whatnot. But very often it is a slow process. I mean, to do something disruptive usually takes time, because you have to sort of disrupt yourself and your own visions of your life and your goals in order to sort of get on board with something that is in and of itself disruptive. But it sounds like such a great pairing, right? Because you had this experience, you had the expertise, you probably went through it yourself, I suppose, with your parents, with your dad, Tina, and your family. I'm assuming you guys were on F2s and H4s, and you may not have realized it, but you were, accompanying family members to a primary visa holder. So at the time where you said, great, I want to join, you now are the immigration expert, right? I mean, you're the lawyer, you know this field in and out. What did CaseBlink do sort of at the time? And then I kind of want to talk through how has the company progressed since then? I know, Khalil, you were doing EB2 and IWs because that's sort of what you knew. It's what you went through. And I'm assuming the idea sparked, in your head with vis-a-vis your own case. Were you guys just focused on EB2 and IWs in the very beginning? Kind of talk me through a little bit. What was the pitch at that time to Tina, and then how has it progressed since then?
I wonder what the pitch to Tina was. It definitely has evolved. So it started with a national interest waiver, and then we moved to writing intensive. So since last year, we covered the O1A and the EB1A, and now we're adding more workflows, so EB1B, O1Bs. I think at the time that was still the vision, but we wanted to start somewhere, and I had naturally started with the NIW, and I think the idea was that because the NIW is so complex, then whatever technology we will build for that, we can transfer it to the other visas that we end up building. And so we always had in mind that we did not want to over tailor our software to national interest waivers, and I think we succeeded at that. So moving from the national interest waiver to O1A and then EB1A was pretty seamless for us because we focused on the essential components to build as opposed to the meticulously replicating the workflow and then getting stuck with a national interest waiver. So we thought about the components that would make sense to build, right? So one of the components is document understanding. So we need technology that understands documents in the context of the visa, what to do with them, what information is useful in those documents, and how to use them in the context of that visa. And then we need case research, because not only you need your client documents, but also you need case law, you need the USCIS website, the policy manual, all that stuff. And then also you need to draft. So once you have all those pieces, then how do you draft? Because it's not simple drafting, and all the difficulties with large language models is they hallucinate, or it's too creative, or not enough, or it repeats itself. So that's also a challenge of its own, and that's why we kind of separated out those components. And the third component is the drafting. And so, yes, we started with a national interest waiver, but always had in mind we're going to branch out to other visas, and so we should be careful how we build this technology.
Can you talk a little bit about how an immigration attorney would interact with a technology like CaseBlink? I mean, one of the things that you mentioned, if it's too creative or not creative enough, that can be sort of changed, and that's visually obvious right away. Hallucinations are the biggest, or one of the biggest concerns, right, with folks in the legal space and really any industry with respect to Gen AI. So can you talk a little bit about how, CaseBlink deals with that, or sort of how an immigration lawyer or someone at an immigration firm can expect to interact with a company like CaseBlink to avoid these concerning aspects of AI?
Yeah, so that's what Tina and I and others on the team have been working on from the very early stage, which is how do we build technology in a way that it will not hallucinate and it will not show text that doesn't make sense, and so we embedded all of that in our backend. And so when you use something like ChatGPT, sometimes it lacks the context, and so it is going to make up the information. So the way that we generate text is always with the presence of context and guardrails, and therefore the text that we and also with Tina's expertise and help, right? So framing how things should be written, or helping us with templates to augment our LLMs, and then tuning them or using agents that correct each other, so that ultimately the end result makes sense and doesn't hallucinate. And it's not easy. It's a lot of back and forth. And then you have so many edge cases. So right now, the way that they interact with our platform is we help them draft. We help them with a first draft. So we help them with a draft that's, let's say, 80%, 85% there. And maybe because every attorney has their way of doing this. And so I think that's also kind of the challenge, because we give them a good first product, but then everyone has an opinion about how to put it together. So I guess now our challenge is, how do we get from 85% to 100%? Mm-hmm. And so the way they interacted with it now is, okay, this is great. In 30 minutes, I managed to get to 85% of what usually takes me 30, 40 hours of work.
And I think on this point, and Tina, I want to ask this question. Ian Hawes asks, thanks for sharing your stories. How do you assure attorneys? So maybe I don't know if it's from a sales perspective, but when you're chatting with an immigration attorney who are concerned about AI guardrails and safety, that CaseBlink is safe. So you've sort of explained the fact that these guardrails exist. How do you explain this? I don't know which one of you wants to take on this question, but how do you explain this to an immigration attorney that says, how do these what are guardrails? How do they work? How do I know that the data that I'm feeding into CaseBlink is going to be secure and safe?
We get that question a lot, but it's mostly about data privacy and security. So a lot of the data that we use is in cloud, and we have zero data retention policies for the large language models that we use, which means that when information is passed on to the model, it's not retained, and it's also not used for training. The thing I want to add to this is that ultimately we are not responsible for whatever is being filed. So although we get you 85% there, the lawyer still needs to review the end product.
Right.
The goal for us is no hallucinations, and I think we are achieving that with how we're approaching the problem, but it doesn't mean that it would, there's no 0% chance that it would happen. And so that's why I think the lawyer should be on the driver's seat and be ultimately responsible for what they're filing. Maybe one day, maybe in 6 months, maybe in 1 year, they would not even have to do that. But I think with the current state of things, that's how at least our customers approach the product that we deliver.
Tina, as a practicing attorney with years of experience, when you think about your prior self before you were diving into the technology side from the inside, how do you train? I mean, how do you get attorneys to be comfortable with adding this to their workflow when in the past there was always a human involved, be it a paralegal, be it a former template that the attorney made that they reuse for writing intensive case? Like, how do you actually, from your experience, how do you work with attorneys to help them get comfortable with this kind of technology?
Yeah, and I think it is challenging sometimes when you're used to doing things a certain way to all of a sudden, start using a new tool or technology, or just change your process in general, especially if you've been practicing for years and you're used to doing something a certain way and it works. The same way we were forced to make a change during the pandemic, then you realize it is possible and actually things can be done better. I don't think the human side of it will ever go away. Immigration is really personal, and it's one of the most complex areas of law. And so the goal isn't to take the human out of it. It's really to, I think technology is meant to improve our lives. And so that's what we're trying to provide with this tool. Is I think immigration attorneys learning how to use this as part of their practice. And at first there might be a learning curve, but it's meant to help them to speed things up. Back when my family went through the green card process, I think the form was like 2 or 3 pages long. I can't remember if it was the 485 or one of those forms was so short. And now it's like 20 pages long. And attorneys didn't go to law school because they want to do all of the administrative work. And even with the help of paralegals, doing a lot of the admin work, they went to law school because they want to solve complex legal problems. They want to help people. They want to spend time advising their clients and thinking of long-term options for them. And so this technology can be used to take away all of the other stuff that distracts from that, in my opinion.
Yeah, I'd say technology in general. I mean, I felt that way about Laborless, and this is way less. There's no real generative AI. It's a workflow tool, right? But when you're doing H-1B compliance, what I was doing was, when I was an attorney, was just checking boxes and sending emails and putting together folders. And same thing. I was like, I don't think I went to law school for this. If I did, I would love doing this. But why do I always hate doing this process and wish that there was a better way? But to your point, Tina, I think when there is, it's just part of your work. You just get used to it, and any disruption to it, change is hard. And I think oftentimes the instinct is to push back against change rather than embrace it. I mean, you have your early adopters that will always embrace change, but they're usually few and far between. So in terms of, I guess maybe one thing I'm trying to understand is, and I'm doing this because for folks who are listening or watching who are working at an immigration firm, lawyers, paralegals, administrative folks, how do they interact with CaseBlink? Like, walk me through You know, I log in, I go to caseblink.com, I log into my thing. When do I do that, and what do I do? What happens? You know?
Yeah, Tina, do you want to take this one? You do a lot of these onboardings.
Yeah, sure. So you log into CaseBlink, and what it does is it's meant to be an end-to-end solution automation to help prepare those writing intensive cases. So the ones that take the longest amount of time to prepare, in part because they're so document heavy and also because they're writing intensive. And so you log in, you upload your documents onto the platform. CaseBlink will organize it for you, summarize it. And so you can, instead of going through every single document for your O1A or EB1A case for your client, it'll organize it into specific categories. And this was built to be visa specific. So for an O1A, it'll show you the criteria. So here's the documents under each criteria, and you can review the summaries. And so by doing that, it speeds up the process of not having to go through every single document. You can just take a look at it and glance at it, make any changes, and see what other documents do I need from my client. It's already organized for me. And then in addition to that, in questionnaires, it'll help with the case research and also drafting. So giving you a first draft of the legal brief, putting together the exhibit list, and drafting the expert letters. And Khalil, I'm sure there's more to add to that.
Yeah, Roman, one of the things, like, we didn't build it like this from day one. One of the things that we realized is that uploading documents is a nightmare. Like, we had it one by one. And someone would come to us and say, hey, like, I have 100 documents to upload, right? So we're not going to have them upload the document one by one. And then they also sometimes receive a folder from their client, and that folder is super messy, has a ton of information that they don't know what to do with. So that's something that CaseBlink helps with in the context of the visa. So what fits under a certain criteria, or how can I use this, let's say, in the legal brief. So yeah, like Tina said, that was the document understanding piece. And then we also suggest answers to our questionnaires, again, specific to the visas. And then finally, the drafting piece. So using all the information from the documents and the questionnaires, we draft the first version of the legal brief, support letters, and expert letters as well. And they can edit, of course. It's a good first draft. They can also collaborate with the foreign national petitioner if they want to. It's essentially a portal, so the individual themselves can log in and upload their documents instead of the attorney doing that. So we have a mix of both populations. We have people who prefer to have their paralegals do that, and we have people who like to actually collaborate with their client on the platform.
So I guess I'm curious about maybe moving forward. I mean, there's a ton of documentation. There's, you're putting together petitions, or at the very least, the drafts of very long, writing intensive pieces of the petition. Do you guys, I mean, are there future integration plans? I mean, is there an opportunity for API, integrations with some of the case management systems where, for example, their cases live administratively, some of the work is being done by this tool, CaseBlink? Is there an opportunity for that? I mean, what do you guys think about that, or just in general future plans?
Yeah, there is an opportunity for that. We're a startup, so our time is very limited in terms of what we what we can do, and so we get very excited about integrations, and then we have like 10 other things that we have to focus on. I think, we're very open to integrations in general. The longer term plan is, I think there's a lot to be done in the writing intensive flows in immigration to start with. So that's what we're focusing on right now. We'll keep adding the visas that we have in the backlog, leveraging the technology that we use. And we also want to enhance that collaboration piece a little bit more. So better collaboration between because a lot of the time is also lost. A lot of the attorney time or paralegal is also lost in those interactions, which do not necessarily have to happen if they're well defined on the platform. So if there is a way that they can effectively collaborate on the platform, then we don't need, they don't need to, I don't know, share 10 emails or share documents that way, or have some sort of back and forth. So honing in on that, as well as expanding to the next workflows.
Do you think, and maybe this may not be the case, but do you think there's opportunity for CaseBlink outside of the immigration space? Thinking about how writing intensive so many other legal verticals are.
Yeah, there are so many options. I guess we are still testing some of that. So as an early stage startup, there's a lot that you can do. We get excited about that. We also get excited about other stuff, but ultimately we really need to focus on the next 4 weeks most of the time.
Right.
We have our big vision, and then even planning 6 months ahead, 3 months ahead is very challenging, because we have an idea what we're doing in the next 4 weeks. We have an idea what we want to do in the next 12 weeks. And then all of a sudden we get all of this feedback from our customers, and it changed the course of what we planned. So I guess, and just to add to that, I think this is also one of the most exciting things about building a company, that you don't know what you're ultimately doing 6 months from now. And you have to enjoy that, because it's not for everyone. Some people just like to have plans and to stick to them, but you can't do that as a startup. You constantly have to take a step back and think, okay, are we doing the right thing? What are we hearing from our customers? And should we change the course of actions?
Tina, as a lawyer, I guess, what's something that you're excited for, with CaseBlink, or maybe with generative AI in general, for the practice, that you're seeing you guys building, responses from clients and so forth?
Yeah, I think just seeing what it's capable of and where we can go. Even today, I'm still amazed by some things that we're able to do. It still surprises me even to this day, and just continuing to see where we can take that, and where we can go from there.
That's awesome. It's funny. Yesterday I was using ChatGPT just for something, like putting together something for like an article I was writing, and same thing. I mean, I've been using it for a year, etc. And just I tell it what to do, and then it just does the thing, and it's like amazing. And it's pretty darn good. I mean, depending on what you use Gen AI for, what it is today is pretty darn good for marketing copy and website copy and things like that. I was on a call with an immigration lawyer, helping her, like, just with her website a little bit, going through like the main page, and there was a portion of it that was so wordy and and whatnot, and she's like, I wish I could, I'll have to work on this. I'm like, let's just do this together now. I shared my screen, pulled up ChatGPT, copy pasted that, and said, please summarize this, make it more concise, etc. And it started to, and she was like, oh my God, is this free? I said, yeah, this is the free version of ChatGPT. Imagine what specialized tools can do, So I do think there's a lot of excitement built into this space. It's not, there's obviously a reason that everyone's talking about AI consistently. I want to kind of end on a question, maybe to both of you. Maybe it's the same answer, maybe not. What's sort of the advice that you guys are listening to right now, as wherever you are in the stage of the company, maybe of your roles in the company? What's the sort of advice that you're telling yourself on a daily basis, that's helping you through wherever you are at the moment?
Advice that we are getting from other people, or that
advice that you got from other people, you heard somewhere, like that's the thing that you're telling yourself right now, going through whatever you're going through?
Yeah, for me personally, it's just to always keep an open mind, and it's in the context of building a company, you're always hyper focused on something. But and I guess this contradicts a little bit what I was saying before, but it's also very good to take a step back and just like observe what progress you've made, be proud of that as well, because we are so deep into what we're doing. Sometimes we don't realize, hey, like 6 months ago we had nothing, and today we have all this. So I think, yeah, as a founder, that's a very difficult thing to do. Just taking a step back and realizing we've accomplished so much and we should be proud of ourselves.
I love that.
Yeah, it's such a roller coaster being part of a startup and building something like this, and just similar to what Khalil said, remembering that there might be days where things are not looking great, and then other days where it's really exciting, and just being there along for the ride, and trying your hardest and improving every day. And also, yeah, like Khalil said, just seeing the bigger picture and remembering what it is we're doing, because you can get so focused on little things every day. So
yeah, I definitely agree with that. In a sense, don't get too down on the down days, but then also don't get overly excited on the happy days, right? You just got to like enjoy the journey and chug along, because otherwise you get stuck in those emotional peaks or valleys, and it's hard to kind of continue to move forward. It's crazy. I mean, I would have days where this still happens. I mean, a little bit less so now because Laborless has been around for a little while, and it feels a little bit more stable, although it's very often it still feels like day one startup. But I would have days where like a client would email us and say, we love XYZ, and I'm on top of the world. I'm so happy. Just genuinely, I was like so happy. And then 2 hours later, a prospect is like, yeah, we're not interested. This product is stupid, and then I'm like, what did I do? Did I make a mistake with my entire life? And it's just the ups and downs. People don't even realize how drastic they can be in a day, but you kind of weather the storm and kind of toughen up to that a little bit over time.
Right. In the same day, you can have a super happy client and then some bug breaking something, and you're like miserable.
And the emotional swings are real. Like, you are miserable, and then so happy to hear from the client. So I love that. Well, thank you guys so much. For folks who are listening, check out CaseBlink. It's caseblink.com, right, is the website. So for any immigration, attorneys or staff working at a firm, if you're working on writing intensive cases, so that's EB2NIWs, O1As, right? EB1s.
EB1As and
EB1As.
Pretty quickly. So even if you're doing O1Bs, EB1Bs, we got you.
Got it. So yeah, maybe reach out and say, hey, I want to get on the queue for this visa type. So check that out. Thank you guys. Thank you both so much for being here, for sharing your stories. I'm super excited to continue to watch the progress of CaseBlink, and obviously just Gen AI and the immigration space in general. 6 years ago, when I really started going to conferences, and like even when I started the show in 2020, this didn't exist like at all, basically, right? And now it is becoming a staple in like the workflow of many law firms. So it's going to be crazy to look back in 5 years and think about how the immigration industry is changing, and you guys are part of that change. So very excited for it. Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Roman.
Well, thank you everyone for watching and listening. What an amazing episode. So excited to just like see where the immigration industry is going, and continue to watch the iterations on Gen AI with the space, in the space rather. Want to say thank you once again to Lex Reception, the main sponsor of this episode. So again, if you didn't hear earlier on, Lex Reception is a legal intake, reception, and client support service. So they help immigration law firms by providing 24/7 legal answering specialists who can answer calls and messages. They can schedule appointments, and they could even reach out to clients on your behalf or prospects on your behalf, so that you don't miss any clients or prospective clients that reach out to your firm. They integrate with a whole bunch of tech solutions, Clio, Practice Panther, LawPay, and others. So if you have a tech stack, they can sort of fit into that tech stack and make your life easier. And if you're interested in checking them out, check out lexreception.com. If you reach out to them there, mention you heard about them from the GMI Rocket Show for $250 off your first month of service with them, or use the link in the show notes just to get directly to that. So thank you all again for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks for the comments and the likes. As always, have a wonderful weekend and stay safe. Peace out.